Okay, all right, we are ready. Jay, you can take over.
Okay. So my the issue that I picked was called the sacrifice to the goddess of smallpox. And so summary of kind of how the story went is that a plague of smallpox entered an Indian village named, I'm going to mess up all these names, so just fair warning, Mukintala. It's basically infecting and killing many children. This is smallpox. The village elders of that village, they sought out like government help to start. That was the first thing they did. A doctor came in and distributed medicine, but the medicine didn't have very much of an effect. It didn't help very much. So the elders then sought the help of a diviner to find the reason of why this is happening. And the diviner's reason was that the village had angered the goddess of smallpox. And the diviner said it was because they offered her only 2 goats instead of a water buffalo at their village feast 5 years ago, and that they haven't offered anything in a really long time. So it's kind of angered this goddess. So the elders immediately called for a sacrifice. It was expected that every household gives something to contribute to the cost of like the water buffalo that they would sacrifice to her, so the goddess would be satisfied. Venkaya is a Christian, and his brothers, they're all Christians, and they had become Christians a few years ago. They refused to give because they had become Christians. But in the village, or in that caste system, they're considered untouchables, and the elders are high caste. And so they were outraged at the idea of an untouchable trying to basically make his own choices. So Venkaya reasoned that he was a Christian, and so worshiping other gods were wrong. The elders reasoned that the goddess named Misama was not a heavenly god like Allah or Rama, but she was an earthly spirit, so giving something to her would affect them directly. And they even said that the Muslims even gave something to the contribution. But Venkaya still refused, and the elders were angry because the blood of other children would be on him, was kind of what they were thinking. They also didn't like his refusal to obey them, so they placed his whole family under a village ban. This meant his family couldn't take part in like the village resources, like they couldn't go to the well, or they couldn't trade, or I don't even think they were allowed to talk to them. And so it was basically isolation from the rest of the village. And this was really hard because this meant that they had to go outside of the village for everything. But it got worse because when even more children died from this disease, the ban intensified to the point where Venkaya couldn't even go to work, couldn't work in the village at all. So they had to have like this, have like their own field, like on their small little piece of land, which was not a lot whatsoever. His Christian brothers, they pleaded for him to give in, to like even contribute just a small amount to it, because it's not like as if they're going to worship or anything like that. It's just something small to bring peace to the village and to make things normal again. And it got even worse because his daughter suddenly came down with smallpox. So Venkaya has been praying and praying and praying for her. But once when that happened, he went to a missionary about 40 miles away. I'm guessing he probably walked there. And the missionary told him to stand firm, and he prayed for her healing. And Venkaya is spending night and day just praying for his daughter, that she wouldn't die. His wife is even distressed by it, that she wants her healed as well. But the fever is still persisting, still there. So the main characters that I found to be in this story were Venkaya, who's an Indian Christian, kind of the center of this whole issue. Then there's Misama, the goddess of smallpox. From the story, it said that she lives in a rock under a tree outside the village. Then there's the elders. They're leaders of the village, kind of determining what goes on. Then there's Rangaya and Pulaya. were Venke's brothers, who are also Christians. Then there's the missionary that lives 40 miles away. And then finally, there's Venke's daughter who's suffering from the smallpox. So I found that a lot of the issues that are being sort of present in this story was the idea of participating in the ritual, and whether or not he should do it or he shouldn't do it. Obviously, he's dealing with the fact of not doing it because he doesn't want to disobey God, and break probably the most important commandment in the Bible. But he also doesn't want that blood on his head, like other families' children. And so there's a lot of pressure on him from the people around him that, he's feeling like he's the one that's causing all their deaths. And then there's kind of the issue of the missionary and how he responds to the situation and what sort of help the missionary has been giving him. It's a really terrible situation. They probably made it the worst situation possible because this missionary is like 40 miles away. But the missionary kind of also has a take in this because he's the one that's sort of trying to give him the answer to this issue and hasn't given him very much. So the alternatives, what I could see him doing is Benkei could be praying for the healing as he has been, and then also praying for like protection from demonic influence, from issues that are going on, and what the villagers are going through, what they're doing. Benkei could also just give in to the goddess, and just contribute the small amount. They're not asking. I don't think they're asking for a lot. I'm pretty sure even just like a cent, like a few coins, would suffice for the contribution. Or they could try even just moving away from the issue itself, just trying to get away from the village, and just removing themselves. But yeah, so the scripture that I have for that kind of ties this issue is James 5:14, where it says, "Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord." Just a passage of praying for healing. And then there's Exodus 32-34, which is the golden calf story, the idea that when Moses went up to the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, Aaron and the rest of the Israelites decided to make a golden calf and worship it, things like that. And when Moses came down, he was really mad, and a bunch of Israelites died. And then there's Exodus 22:20, which is, "He who sacrifices to any god other than to the Lord alone shall be utterly destroyed." So, and then for the articles that I had, one of the interesting things is that as I was working on this, I had an assignment in cultural anthropology on the excluded middle. And it, funnily enough and coincidentally enough, gave the actual ending to this case study.
To this one? I didn't
Yes.
remember
This case study
that.
is an actual real story.
That's no fair. You know this.
The article gave the end of it. It spoiled it for me, and I was like, okay. So
I didn't remember that.
So
That's
yeah.
cool.
But yeah, that's what I got.
Wait, so what happened?
You can tell us later.
Cliffhanger there.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Good. All right, let's discuss this. What's going on?
Your stances stand firm then?
Oh, 100%.
I didn't remember hearing it.
Oh, sorry.
Stating. Sorry.
Yeah, I honestly, I mean, it's almost a no-brainer. He should definitely not be part of this ritual. I don't think there's any sort of ground for that, at least. But the actual solution and what he can do proactively, I think that's kind of more the crux, what he's trying to work through.
You think there is a solution, like a way for him to like amend with the village in a way, or like maybe he should move out of the village?
Yeah, that's why I kind of gave those two alternatives because, I mean, moving out of the village is always an option. I mean, I wouldn't judge him for just taking his family and moving away.
I wouldn't either.
'Cause I wouldn't even want to be near that influence at least. But at the same time, I think that because he's like one of the few Christians in that village, he really does have an opportunity to present his God, basically show how powerful his God is.
Yeah.
Because I think what we talked about before in this class, or I'm getting all my classes mixed up, but in one of my missions classes, we talked about power encounters and how important they are to, like, especially people of that culture. So, just saying like, it'll all work out is not really going to satisfy the village, not at all. So they kind of rely on something a little bit more physical, something more that they can like grasp and be a part of. So
So you're saying that it would be an encouragement to the village if her daughter, or his daughter, I mean, like suddenly became well, and like that would be the best option for it?
well, I mean, I'd love it if his daughter was healed, but I don't think that necessarily has to happen. But I think in how he responds to it and all the action, because the village is watching everything that he's doing. He's basically being a witness of his God. And so what he does and the actions that he shows them is ultimately going to show truth. Like, because I think if he caves into the ritual, I feel like that's only going to cement the idea that this random goddess of smallpox that lives in a rock under a tree outside the village is actually real, actually has influence. So he definitely shouldn't, I don't think he should be caving into it, but I don't also think that like he needs to make a miracle happen in order for them to change.
Who has not had cultural anthropology yet here? Will and Rachel, you have not. I'm sorry. Non-Christian religions, excuse me. Who has not had non-Christian religions? Just you two. Can we study Hindu? Are you familiar with the outcast idea?
A little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's the lowest of the lowest. They call them Dalits now, D-A-L-I-T, and they're not even considered to be part. The other castes are considered to have emanated from this kind of primordial being, that, and the outcasts didn't even come from that. I mean, they were so low that he's in a situation here where he's not even considered to have any authority to say anything to contribute to the business of the village. Yeah.
I think it's a little strange then that like if he's like not even, if he's so low he shouldn't contribute to the business of the village, but like it's his donation that's gonna tip the scales, you know what I mean?
Why can't they sacrifice? I mean, why can't they, sacrifice or like give their money? Like, why does it have to be that guy? Like,
I think it's because since it's the whole village that's into play, the whole village has to contribute to it. So it doesn't matter how much, I mean, they could raise all the money in the world to buy however many buffalo they want, but if his household doesn't give the money, then I don't think the goddess will be satisfied.
Think if Achan sinned in Israel, one family disobeys and God says Israel has sinned. So he holds the whole community. That's that community idea, collectivism. Yeah, it has to be everybody.
So does anyone have an idea of what he should do?
I don't think there's much he can do.
Yeah.
I don't even know how, like, moving away definitely is the solution, but I don't know how viable that would be for him as a poor farmer who's of this untouchable class. I think that he should, well, all he can do is trust that God is working everything for his good, which obviously God is, and that no matter what happens, God has it under control, and God is ultimately even more powerful than this goddess of smallpox.
about the missionary that he traveled out to? Couldn't that be, did it say like where the missionary is at, like 40 miles away? Is he like with another village or something like that? Like,
It just said a missionary.
Like, if he was with another village, could like,
What?
You know what happened. Does it say anything about the missionary?
Well, if I give away the end, this whole case means nothing.
Play dumb.
I'm trying really hard not to just say.
could it be a solution that he moves to where the missionary is to help the missionary out? Like, since they serve the same God, and like,
Mhm.
he can look to grow in his faith with the missionary as well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what kind of ministry the missionary is doing.
It's such a collectivistic society. It is so powerful there that for him to up and leave his entire family, move away, is not just economically hard, but it's socially oppressive. It's not that it's impossible, but it's going to be very, very difficult. And then, can the missionary take him in? The people that they're just, we think of getting up and moving, you can do it at a moment's notice, But boy, for him, he probably has no means of transportation. He'd be walking. He has no money.
His daughter is sick.
Pardon? Yeah, exactly. Gonna move a daughter with smallpox, 40 miles away. Yeah, I mean, practically speaking, it's next to impossible for him to do that. Really hard.
One of the larger issues that I think makes this a good case study is that they already tried the Western solution, like government help. They got a just regular doctor in, just gave them like the material medicine, and it didn't work. And so a larger question, not so much for even Benkea, but for the whole village, is like, what are they supposed to do? Like, they have like all these children dying. They already tried the neutral, just secular solution, and it's gone down the drain. And so, like, what other options do you have left other than the spiritual or the religious? So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, what were they supposed to do in this situation? Well, I guess we tried. We'll just deal with it, I guess. So, like, the idea that they had to go to someone else for a solution, and they went to a diviner. Like, and the reasoning was whatever goddess, who needed this, who you didn't do, and now you need to do this to appease her. So it's like the same formula.
What's you guys' opinion about the missionary's advice?
I think his exact
What was that
advice.
again?
His exact advice was, so the missionary prayed for Benkea and his daughter, and then he exhorted Benkea to stand firm in his belief, or stand firm in his faith. That's all it said.
You mentioned he prayed. He asked him to pray that his daughter would be healed. Was that him asking the missionary? I don't remember that part.
The missionary prayed for healing. He prayed for Benkea and his daughter. Because the reason he went to the missionary in the first place was because his daughter had become ill with the smallpox. So it's kind of like Benkea's response to it, in contrast to how the rest of the village had responded to it. So Benkea basically went to his healer, I guess.
Another thing about taking his family, I mean, if he grabbed a daughter with smallpox and moved her, it would just bring fear and terror on whatever village he goes to because of the
Mhm.
Basically be
contamination.
like spreading.
Yeah.
Basically staying where he is about the only option that I can see that would work. Because for him, like, to up and move, he already has a sick daughter, that's not gonna work, and that's also not going to be very well for anywhere he moves, because she is sick. And I would say that he should stand firm, because it is showing Christ, and then he's just gonna have to keep praying, because giving money to this God, whether they think it's gonna help or not, you have no, they have no idea if it's really gonna work either. So,
Let's just suppose for a second that his daughter gets well. He prays for her, she's healed. What will that do for the village?
I feel like it would make them angry because none of their kids. But then on the flip side, maybe then they'll be like, oh, because we gave money and our kids didn't. I don't know.
Or there's like the like what we talked about with Simon in the Bible. Yeah. They might be like, oh, his daughter got well. Now I want to convert to Christianity, so God will heal my children too. There's also that option too.
Then they convert and their children die.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now what? Nothing wrong with praying for healing. That's totally legitimate. But is there any guarantee that if she's healed, that the tribe will be converted, be convinced that his God is God? No.
That can go both ways.
Mhm.
Where if she dies, he'll be like, see, we told you so. But God can work in either situation.
So everybody's sitting there waiting for the end of the story, aren't you?
I feel like this one's just kind of rough.
It's rough. Yeah. The issues are a little bit more black and white when it comes to what he should do, aren't they? They're not quite as thorny as some of the other ones have been. It just seems like there's no way he can give in to this, and yet he can't move. It's almost like he's stuck there to experience whatever happens. Before Jade lets the cat out of the bag, are there any other issues that we've missed that are considered, or Jade, is there anything else you want to discuss from the story that you think we should consider before you proceed with what actually happened? We don't know how long he's been a Christian. The story doesn't really tell us that, does it?
It says like 3 years.
Oh, it did say.
Yeah, like 3 or 4 years.
Okay, sorry. How well grounded are they?
One of the interesting details was the elder's justification, in that Misama was not a heavenly god like Allah or Rama, like detached from this earth, but that she was an earthly spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of giving her something is like more important, like there's more meaning behind it, because it's going to affect them so much more. And so it's like that earthly spirit is all the people in that village are kind of accountable to her, more so than people being accountable to Allah or Rama. Because the elders did admit that, like, you can worship whatever God that you want. They're not like saying you have to worship this God, but they're saying that this spirit is different. It's not on the same level as a heavenly God. So it's not something that you can just choose to worship or not, or choose to give something to or not. So they make a distinction between Misama as a type of deity and just the heavenly gods, like the main gods, I guess. So
the city here, Hyderabad, is it's actually a fairly large city now. In fact, the first time I went to India, we landed there. It's in south central India, and I remember when we went down to a little farther south of Bangalore, we visited Pastor J.D. Enosh. They had trouble in their region there with cobras, but they were not allowed to kill the cobras because they were considered gods. I mean, very animistic. But because he was an evangelical pastor, they didn't care if he killed the cobra, because he, whatever happened to him happened to him. In other words, the cobra wouldn't turn on them because he wasn't one of them. So he actually would be called out if there was a cobra somewhere, and he would actually kill them for the people. And they were okay with that as long as they're not killing him, and he was different. So, Hinduism is full of animism, and that's what you're seeing here. Well, Jade, I guess if there's no other comment at this point, you kind of.
So the article that you gave us to read, The Excluded Middle, has a lot to do with that like dichotomy between Western science and folk science, and how like Christians will readily believe the like Western science, but they completely exclude or take out the folk science. And so the term excluded middle is used as like there's no like fusion of the both. There's no recognition of the both. Like the spiritual side of things, just the material, naturalistic side of things. And it leads to an issue where Christian missionaries have no idea how to like respond to a situation like this, where to the people in this Indian village, like Misama is a real thing. Like she's real. And so being a Christian missionary, it's not necessarily the best idea to just go, nope, she's not real. Like, and like, you know, there's no credibility to that. They're like, well, see all these kids dying? I don't believe you at all. So there's no recognition of like evil spirits or anything like that within Christianity. And there is an extreme to that where we probably shouldn't be recognized, like being too involved in spiritualism, but at the same time, we creep to the other extreme, which is there's no recognition whatsoever, no thought process on it. And so the end of this story, the guy that whose daughter was sick, his name is actually, they changed his name for some reason. They changed his name because we might recognize him, but his real name is Yalea. And it is confirmed that he did walk the entire 40 miles to the missionary. And the missionary had a prayer meeting with Yalea. But then later on, like a week after, Yalea came back to the missionary, tell him that his daughter died. And how the missionaries, like this is from the missionary's perspective, which is interesting. He says that he felt like defeated, and it was mostly because he had prayed for healing. He had been like, yes, like we're praying for healing, and it didn't succeed. You know, there was no didn't seem like there was a positive answer from this. But then after that, a few weeks later, Yalea came back with a sense of triumph. He says, like, and the missionary's like, how can you be happy? Your child just died. And he says that the village would have acknowledged the power of our God had he healed the child. So, but Yalea said, but they knew in the end she would have to die. So if the child had actually been healed from the smallpox, they would have said, well, Misama came through for us, you know, despite how terrible we were in giving her the sacrifice. Like they would have recognized the power of Misama. So in this sort of like really morbid and sad way, because his child had died, they put on a funeral for her. And when the village saw it, how reverent they were, or how joyous they were, even though their child had died, it had made an impact in the village, because they saw the hope, as he states, the hope of resurrection and reunion in heaven, the greater victory over death itself, and they are now asking about the Christian way. So they're seeing the fact that like death is not necessarily a bad thing. And so the villagers recognize that, and they're kind of curious of what sort of, I guess, joy or what sort of power lies in that. So that was the conclusion of the story. And I just find it interesting that Yalea came to this missionary 3 times. That means that he traveled 240 miles worth of walking back and forth to this missionary. But I just thought it was really cool that even though that, like, he didn't end up having like this huge cure that helped his child, the idea that he was able to respond to the bad situation that his child had died in the right way had led to the villagers being convicted about like what kind of God Benkei is serving. Because all these people, all their children are dying, and they're like they're just despondent. They're sad. They're broken by it. You know, they have no joy because their kid has died. They think it's a curse that their child has died. And for Benkei, it's almost like a blessing. Like, because now she's in heaven, now that she's like living the good life, and soon they will too, like going up to heaven. So it just, I think for the villagers, they're seeing a glimpse of just a brighter way of life, just a better way of life, a better God to serve. And so I think that I think not giving in to the goddess of Nisama was definitely the way to go. In terms of the response to what happens afterward, I think he also did in a very, very good manner, because it ended up actually providing some good rather than evil. So I don't know. I didn't say anything about whether or not the village ban had been lifted up on them or anything like that, but I'm sure that it had produced something within the village.
So let's compare God with God here. What is the one attribute that really dominates the animistic? When you think of God or the concept of God, what's the one attribute that dominates their thinking?
Are you asking
From their
from an
vantage point.
animistic
Yes,
perspective?
from their vantage point, yeah. What's the one attribute that is overwhelming, that means everything when they're thinking about their God? In this story, what's the attribute of God that they're looking for?
Healing?
Right, and by power is what I'm thinking of. Power. It's all. That's why they call these power encounters. They call them power cultures. It's all about the power of the god or goddess to heal. Okay, if his daughter had been healed, they would have witnessed the power of God, the God of the Bible. Okay, in other words, they would have seen tit for tat, power versus power. But the death of this daughter results in the witness of other attributes of God that they never perceive in their own gods. What are those attributes? You've already kind of alluded to some of them.
Joy.
Okay, yeah, I guess we don't usually really refer to God as being joy as one of his attributes, but he comes from that. What attributes, you're right, but the joy comes from perceiving what attribute of God? What is it about Christian God that they would not see in their own God that came as a result of the death of this girl? The God of love, okay?
Where kid has power over death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But what else besides love? Just think about the death of this daughter. What does that bring out in the believers connect to God? What comes out of that death that they would never experience with relationship to their own gods?
They have hope that they'll see her again.
Okay, hope. Okay, and that hope is okay. Right, develop. Where'd that come from? That hope.
Because she's alive in heaven.
Okay, which means
I'm sorry.
there's a lot of richness in this. You're right. I mean, You're right, they'd hope that their joy, okay, talk about joy. What is it, going a little deeper here, about God that makes that hope and that joy possible?
I think it goes back. My thought is it's power again, but it's a different kind of power where it's a gives power over death, which gives them the hope and the joy. But there's also an imminence where they can feel him.
Okay.
He's present there. With them.
Okay, all right, that's a really good word, imminence. When God transcended, he's distinct from the creation, but he comes close. That what you got to understand, in an animistic culture, when the spirits are close, it's not good. It's usually something bad's going to happen. The Greek and Roman gods were the same way: keep them away, keep them happy, and let me live my life. So the nearness of God has to be evident in what happened here. There's a relationship, an intimacy somehow with this God of the Christian that they have never experienced before. And that's why when their loved ones die, all they can do is mourn and cry. There's so this is the type of thing I'm looking for: intimacy, nearness, relationship that's totally unknown in their world. And not just the animistic world, but you think of the gods of Vishnu and Brahma, and Shiva, all those the main gods of Hinduism. They have no relationship with those gods. They're just so the richness of God's person, His love, His care, the support, and that could be related to power, the strength that He gives to them at that moment, but not just strength, but joy and peace. I think peace is another thing that comes through. God is a God of peace. Where does that peace come from when a child dies? It just seems like so contrary to everything they've ever experienced. So God revealed Himself to this tribe through the death of this girl in ways that they would never have perceived had she been healed. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't pray for healing. I think we all understand that. But when it doesn't happen, that's the question you want to ask. What is God showing this tribe? What's He revealing about Himself to them that they don't have? That makes sense. Some of you may have been through situations like in your own life where something, really bad, hey, you prayed and God didn't let it happen. But as a result of, whatever it was, even though it hurt, you can see certain things come out of that were a blessing. Yeah.
So do you think that the missionary responded sufficiently for?
It's 40 miles away.
Yeah.
It is hard. What's the missionary going to do? I mean, is he going to up and go there? Say, yeah, he should have gotten up and gone back with them. Well, we don't know anything about this missionary's life. I mean, it's a long haul, and we don't know what his ministry is like. So I wouldn't fault the missionary. Sometimes that's about all you can say is, give him some, maybe pray with him, give him some verses. Here's some things you can read, think about. We don't know if these guys are literate. If they're outcasts, most likely they don't even read. So most of their learning is oral learning. He may have shared some Bible truths with them. So I would be careful, not to expect more of the missionary in this case than what he could give them. Yeah. Yeah, the story in the article doesn't tell us what the response of the village was.
No, it just says that they've begun to ask about the Christian way.
Yeah. See, and the fact that they begin to ask about it, what provokes them to ask? There's something about this God that we don't see in ours. Yeah. So,
Kind of didn't want this case study to actually be real.
What do you mean?
This is a real story.
Oh, you were hoping it was just made up.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah, I'd like to know what happened to his brothers, too,
Yeah, they caved in quick.
They caved. Yep. It's too bad. Yeah.
I also find it interesting that the Muslims had given to that contributed to it as well. Like I've never read the Quran, but I mean, I'm sure that there's something in there about only worshiping Allah. So I found it really interesting that the elders were like, yeah, even the Muslims did it. So,
The Muslims in India are definitely a subordinate group. I've heard that as many as 25% of India is Muslim. I had an Indian pastor tell me that. Seems like a lot. Most of them are up in the north, more than, but they're all over. But there's more in the north. But many Muslims are persecuted in India because they don't have that dominance that they do in some other places in the world. And radical Hindus will persecute, injure, attack, mosques and Muslim places in India sometimes. Yeah. So they may have given in, for save their own necks. Yeah. Yeah. So the rest of the story we'll have to wait until we get to heaven, I guess, unless somebody else has written about it, which we know nothing about. So all that to say that power encounters aren't necessarily the best answer. Sometimes God allows something that appears to show his weakness, his inability to save, to heal this girl. But then he uses the surviving people who are his to reveal himself. Isn't that something? You think, man, God just shot himself in the foot. He could have healed her and showed who he was. No, he didn't shoot himself in the foot. He had a whole different plan. That's a really good lesson for all of us. God doesn't answer prayers and let things happen the way that we think would bring about the best results. It's because we don't know what the best results really are. And he showed them in an interesting way in this story. Hey, good. Well, thanks. Did a good job on that. Well done. So, Kenzie, you're on for Thursday?
Yep.
Number 14, love him or leave him. I need your cards if you. Number 14, love him or leave him. And that'll be it till spring break. All right? Give you a few minutes. We'll get a coffee or something. Thank you very much.
Thank you.